Okay, so previously we've looked at how to link JavaScript to HTML. So now let's try to do some other things in with our HTML. So we use JavaScript to manipulate. You can use JavaScript to manipulate um, our HTML. So now I'm going to give this HTML element a class name of hello, right? I'm going to give it a class name of hello. Just like we select elements in CSS, we also have a way that we select elements in in the JavaScript. So we're looking at how to select HTML elements. So we are looking at how we can select HTML elements in our JavaScript. So now I gave this element a class of hello. So in our CSS, we already know how we can select this element, how we can target this element. We can target this element by saying dot hello, right? So it turns out that in our JavaScript we have a whole lot of methods to select an element, just like in CSS also. Like you can select element by class name, by by the ID name, by the element name, by the the tag name, or you can even select element that is a child of a particular parent. That is by targeting the parent and then target the element. You can even get the first child of of a particular parent, right? Like we have a lot of ways in CSS. Turns out that we also have a lot of ways to get elements in our JavaScript. So I'm going to walk you through some of them. So the first one that I'm going to mention is the get element by ID. We have get element by ID. But before you do that, you have to target the document because we are manipulating the document, right? So you say document dot, then you get element by ID. So you can see we have get element by ID, we have get element by class name, we have get element by name, we have get element by tag name, get element by tag names, and so on and so forth. We also have query selector and query selector all. So I'm going to explain some of them to us. So get element by ID is going to get element from this document. Now the document that we are referring to here is our HTML document. Do we get it now? It's our HTML document. So now I'm saying that from or the document that we link, any document that this file is being linked to. Do we get it now? So now I'm saying that from that document, from the HTML document, when I'm saying DOM, I'm referring to document. So from the document that is being linked to, get an element by ID. An element, ID, when we're talking about ID, we're referring to something singular, right? Like we can't have the same ID, right? I'll have an ID that, like, ID is meant to be unique identity. Identity is meant to be unique, right? So, and then this is the syntax: get element by ID, followed by a parenthesis, and then within the parenthesis you give it a ID, the element ID, just like we know in our in our HTML. We can add class and we can add ID. We can give an element and a class and also an ID. So I'm going to give it an ID of word. So I can then go to my JavaScript and then say, okay, get any element with the ID of world. Do we get it now? So this is going to return us this element. It's going to get this whole element here. It's going to return it to the JavaScript. Then the JavaScript can then do whatever thing it wants to do with it. So this is going to return what? It's going to return the HTML element that it's set to get. And if Yes, an element can have only one ID. Like an element is supposed to have a unique ID, right? So which means you shouldn't give that ID to another element. Like if you should call this first element world, you shouldn't come here again and give this an ID of world. That's what I'm saying. So IDs must be unique, but class names, you can give this a class name of child, and you can also set the same thing for this, right? This is allowed. Like you can have like more than one element can have the same class names, but they shouldn't have the same IDs. Do you get it now? They shouldn't have the same IDs. IDs must be unique. So if you're going to give this an ID, then you should give it ID of like child one. Do you get it now? And so on and so forth. So mhm. Okay, that's what I'm saying. That's where ID comes in. You should then use an ID to target a particular one, or you just give it a unique class instead. So yeah, but the best way is to give it a unique ID. So since you're giving that one child one, you can name this child two. You get it now? So yes, sir. So to get a data ID is going to return us a single element. So now there's something also called terminal. I've already explained it before. So HTML, I mean JavaScript can be run on terminals. So I'm going to log this, to see the result of this query. This is called a query. Like we are querying for this document on the like we are querying for this document, trying to get this element, right? So to show the result, you can show the result in a terminal, in a terminal called console in JavaScript. So it's available on our browser. It's available on our browser, so you can just see the result on the browser. So this thing now, I told you, is going to return something. It's going to return an element, right? If the element exists, it's going to return the element. But if the element does not exist, it's going to return undefined, right? Okay, say I want to get word two, word two. I want to get word 2, right? But then there's no element with that ID here. The only thing we have is word, child one, and child two. But we are trying to get ww2. So it's going to return what? Undefined. Okay, so let's say we've gotten this now. What then can we do with it? We can do a lot of things with it, but then we can just store it in something called variable. So what are variables? Variables are just um like a placeholder, like an holder. Like we've got this element, but we have to store it somewhere temporarily. So it's a temporary storage of something. So you can store it temporarily in a variable that I'm going to call word. You can store it in a variable called word. So now the result of this action is going to be stored in this variable called word. Are we following? So now when I try to alert word, or when I try to use when I'm trying to refer to this, I can then say word. It's just like Mary, your friend gave you a name, right? So that whenever they call that name, you answer, right? So it's just something like this too. Like when you now say word, you are actually talking about this element. Do you get it now? So you are talking about this element. You're talking about this element whenever we are talking about word. Look at this now. You see all these attributes, blah blah. It's the same thing that it would have given you if you type it here. You get it now. Okay. So now what can we do with this? Number one, we can log it to the console to see the result. I can just say console.log. So that is the syntax. Console.log and then word. So it's either I do this or I just console.log this whole thing here. Do you get it? Like this whole thing like this. Do you get it now? So it's either I just write the whole thing like this, or I or I just write using the variable. So the variable is just like a temporary storage. Okay. So now let's preview it on the browser, refresh, and then let's check the console. So you can get the console here, and then you see it's saying null because it's unable to get the element from the document. And why is that? Why is it not able to get the element? Now there is something about linking HTML in our like linking our JavaScript file in the HTML file. Now the HTML is being read from the top of the page to the bottom, right? So it means that when this HTML file is being read, imagine it's ready to this point where we link the CSS on line 8, and then on line 8 it tries to execute what's in this file. Now it came here, it's saying that on line 1 I'm trying to get an element with the ID of word, right? And then it came to HTML. There's no element with the class of word from here to this place. Is there any element with the class of word? No. So that's why it's returning null. So how can we fix this? It turns out that there's two ways for us to fix this. The simplest way is just for me to move this script tag to the bottom. This script tag can be placed in the head section of our HTML, or in the body elements, in the body tag. Do you get it now? So even if I should move it here, it's going to work though, but it's going to work like we're going to it's linked correctly, but then will it still find this element? No, because this element is still beneath it, and the browser has not yet loaded this file, right? So this script won't be able to see this file because it has not been loaded into the document yet. Do you get it now? So the best way to fix it is by moving it beneath the element. So if you should refresh the page now, you see that it's going to get that element for us. Can you see it now? It's printing out the whole element. the whole HTML element for us on the console. Do you get it now? So that's why you should put your that's one of the ways that you can use to solve this. But then to solve it generally, it means that you should put your JavaScript at least before the closing tag of the body element. Do you get it now? So when you put it here, you can get any element in the HTML file. So so that's one way to fix this. But another way to fix this is by wrapping everything in something called an event listener. The event listener is going to listen till when all the documents of the HTML are being loaded. That's when the script is going to run. So when the browser tries to run that file, it encounters the script, it jumps it and then read the rest of the file. So once the rest of the file has been read, then the event is going to fire because it's going to notify the JavaScript that, hey, I've completely loaded the file. Do what you want to do now. Then it's now is that is when it's going to then fire up this event by getting this element, this ID. You get it now? So the second way of doing that, I'm going to do it now. That's this. Mhm. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. That's why that's the reason why I said it is better to just be before the closing tag of the body, so that whichever thing you then added is already here. So now we are looking for the ultimate solution to this. Like how can we solve this whole thing without even moving the position of this script? Because there are two things that's into this. It's not just by placing it around. It's also by loading. You see, it's actually some people would advise that you should even link it beneath, like before the closing of the body element. But there might be a case where you will need it at the top of the page. So to solve everything, you can just use or you know whichever one that solves what you are trying to do. So you can target the window and add an event listener to it. So an event listener is a function in JavaScript that listens to an event. So it takes two arguments. It takes the event it's listening to. Now the event I want it to listen to here is called the DOM content loaded. That's when this event would only fires when all the documents in the HTML has been loaded to the browser. Then the DOM content loaded event is going to be fired. So when this um, event event occurs, what do we want the JavaScript to do? We want it to run a function. Then you pass in the callback function to this. So you pass in the callback function. So you can then write a callback function here. So a callback function does not have name. So and you can pass in the pass in a parameter. You can pass in a parameter. So this parameter here is um is going to be the event. It's going to be like the it's going to hold some information about the event. We can choose to leave it and we can choose to remove it if we do not need any information from the event at all. Like in this case now, we won't need any information about the event, so I'm going to remove it. But there's a place where we would need something like this, then we just use the event. Now in that event, that's where you would now need to get the element. That's what you want to do if the element, I mean, if the DOM content has been loaded. That is, when this DOM content loaded event is fired, what you want it to do is to run this callback function. And what this callback function will do is to get an element by ID, save it in a variable called word, and then log it to the console. So now let's check it now and see if it's going to run it or not. So as you can see, it prints out the element for us. And so this is the element. This is all the property and attributes of these are all the attributes of the element. You can see it prints out all the attributes of the element for us. So yeah, that's it. Now there are other things we can do with the elements we got back from the HTML. There are a lot of things we can do with that. But before we go into that, let me show you some other ways that we can use to get back the to get or to select elements from our HTML. So I'm going to go with adding the JavaScript file beneath, before the closing tag of the body element. So yeah, so that's what I'm using it. Okay. So now I've shown us how we can use get element by ID. So it turns out that we have other ways to get element from the document. That is, we have get element by class name, get elements as the as it sounds, get elements, right? Class name is considered to not be unique, right? Like a lot of elements can have the same class name, just like we have it here in our HTML. We have this second list and this we have this first list and this second list to have a class of child, right? They both have a class of child. So it means that if I should try to get elements by class name, and I'm going to pass in the the class name. Now, the class name is going to be passed in as a string, as something called a string. In JavaScript, we have different data types. We have string, we have float, we have variables, we have integers, and so on. So string, if you are going to write a string, you must enclose a string within a quote, either double or single. As you can see, the other time I used a double quote, right? But this time around I'm using a single quote. Turns out that both of them works. Like you can use either single quote or double quote. But the fact remains that whenever you're trying to write a string, you must enclose them within what? Within a quote, either single or double. You have to enclose them within a quote. Okay, and then if you're going to write a variable, you don't need to enclose it within a quote, but then the variable must be declared first. can't just come in here now and say get element by ID child. You see, this child is not enclosed within a quote, but it's going to, like JavaScript is going to treat it as a variable because it's only variable that you write within without enclosing within a quote. So if this is treated as a variable, the variable must be what? The variable must have been declared. So if the variable is not declared yet, then it's going to cause an error when you try to run your function. It's going to, when you try to run your JavaScript, it's going to let you know that the variable child is what is not defined. So you have to define your variable before you can call or before you can use the variable in JavaScript. But for integers, you can just write integers without enclosing them in any variable. But integers can also be treated as a string. So if you should enclose a integers within a string within a quote, either double or single, it's going to be treated as a string and not as numbers. So some other data types we have are float, like when you have like 2.3, this is a floating point number, so so on and so forth. So in this case, we are using string. We're using a string to give the class name. So the class name is called what? Child. So let's see what this will return for us. So we're going to save this in a variable called what? Called C. So the variable name can be anything. You can give your variable any name, just a name that will make sense to you and make sense to what you are trying to do. Okay, I should be asking you by now, is this a variable or a string? It's a string because it is enclosed within a quote, and this C here is a variable, and this is the declaration of the variable. This is how we declare a variable. Exactly, it's representing, or yeah, it's kind of a representative. It should be representing all of this. Exactly. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so um now let's log this to the console just as we did for before. Let's try to see what it's going to print to the console. So we are trying to print C, refresh, and it's going to get us an HTML collection. Now, why is it getting us an HTML collection? It's because even this is not just because we have two elements with that class name. Even if it's one element, it's still going to be in a collection. You see, you have two elements, which means that it's going to return all the elements. That is why it's called get elements in plural, because it's expecting it to get more than one element, because you are getting a class name, and it knows that, just knows that you can give many elements the same class name. Hmm? So now it's going to return us something called a list, something called HTML collection, which is like an array. So it's going to return us an array of results. So to now use that, you have to do something called loop. You know what looping is? At least from normal life thing, like when you say something is looping, it means that the thing is kind of going in a circle, right? It's kind of going in a circle. So we can then loop through it. We can loop through the results to get each of the elements within the HTML collection. So that's getting elements with, I mean, by class name. So we also turns out that we also have other ones too, like the get element by tag name. So you can get element by tag name. Now, getting element by tag name, you don't need to enclose them. I mean, you don't. Okay, okay, that's for selector. So getting element by tag name. This you don't need either um the class or the ID. You just need the tag name. We already know what tag names are, right? So this is the tag name for this element. The tag name for this element is what? Li. The tag name for this element is Li. The tag name for this element is H1. The tag name for this element is body. Do we get it now? So that's how we can get the element by tag names. See, getting the element by tag name Li. So let's log that to the console and see what it's going to return. You see, it also returns what? HTML collection. Please, this is important to know. Like, you have to know what it's returning back to you. You have to know that using class names or tag or get elements by tag name is going to return you a collection of data. This is not because we actually have two. Even if you have one element, it's still going to return you what? It's still going to return back a, a collection, a list. It's just going to be that in the list you only have one element in it. Are we following? So it's just going to turn out that you have only one element within the list, but it's still going to be list. Reason why I'm emphasizing on this is you can't work directly on a list just as you're going to work on on um, on one single element. On a single element, if I should get a single element, like if I should do something like this, if I should get the element with the class, with the ID of word, right? If I should get that element in my get element, oops. So these are the things I can do with this directly. I can just say dot text content. I can just get the text content of this element, right? But with this, I can this is going to get the text content. What's the text content here? The text content is this text that is inside this element, which is what? Hello, welcome to JS101 course. Okay, let me just show you to pause. Let me just log this to the console, right? So I'm logging the results to the console. So now let's see the results right here. Okay, for text function. Okay, the error is that there is no text content is not a function. So to get the text content, you see. So the error there was that I added a parenthesis, so there's no parenthesis. It's just dot text content. So that is going to return us what? It's going to return back the text content that is inside the element that we got back from the document, right? So this is like we're able to get this directly from this element because it's returning us a single element. Are you following? It's returning back a single element. But in this case where we are getting a list of elements, it's going to these are going to be in an array. You can't just say c dot text content. It's not going to work. You see, it's going to return what? Undefined, because this is a list of elements. It's not yet the element. Now, how can you get to this element? You have to perform something called looping. You have to loop in through each element that is inside the that is inside the array. You have to loop through them. So when you loop through the list at first, then you have the first element, and then when the loop continues the second round, you have what? The second element. Do you get it now? So, but we're going to we'll get there, but not yet. So that's just the difference between when we say elements and elements. So now it turns out that we also have other other ways of getting elements by using the query selector, something called query selector. So query selector, it works like the way we select elements in our CSS. So with query selector, you can select an element by class name or the ID. So to specify that, as you can see, I didn't this is not get element by ID or get element by class name. But if it's going to be, it's just query selector. So now you the one that will now have to pass in what you are trying to select. So if you are going to select an element, you just pass in the element name, then it will select the element for you. Sorry. Then it will select the element and return it back. You see, it's going to select the first occurrence. Do you get it now? Like, we have more than one li, right? But then since you said it should just select, you only ask it to select, so it's going to select one. So it's going to select the first one that occurred, the first one that he finds on the page, on the document. Is going to return that back to you, right? So if you want to select element by class name, then you have to pass in dot, then the class name dot child, right? So this is going to return the first occurrence also. This only returns one element. Query selector only returns one element, but we have another query selector called query selector all. So query selector all is going to return every occurrence of that um of the query, right? So, and also if you're going to select an ID by ID rather, so you have to pass in what? Hash. Just like we do this, just like we select in CSS, right? So this is going to also select or get us any element with the ID of child one, and it's going to get us what? The first occurrence. Do we get it now? So the next one is the query selector all. Query selector all works like we are doing get elements by class name. So it's going to get a lot of elements. It's going to return us a list, just like get elements is returning an HTML collection. This is going to return an array of elements. Do we get it now? So since we know that this is going to return a list, so there is no need to even use it to get an ID, right? So you can just use it to get element by class name or the element by the element name. So if you want to get element by element name, don't forget you won't put either dot or hash at all. You just pass in the element name. But if it's going to be a class, you pass in dot, and if it's going to be an ID, you pass in hash. Okay, so you see this is going to return something called node list, which is also similar to HTML collection. You see, it's a list. It's a list that contains multiple elements. If it has like 10 occurrence of this, then it's going to return 10 of them. This is what I mean. You see, it's only returning two because we have two here. If I should have more than two, then it's going to return the all the occurrence one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight of them. Do we understand it now? Okay, so okay, are we understanding this? Are we understanding this? Does anyone have a question? Okay, so that is query selector. That's query selector. At least with this five ways of, is it five or four? How many have I mentioned? So we've mentioned so we mentioned the use of get element by ID. Okay, so we've gone through how we can select elements from our document, and we've looked how we can, five different ways for us to do that. So we firstly we look at how we can get the element by ID, which is going to return a single, which always returns a single element. It always returns what? A single element. Then query selector also returns single element. They returns the first occurrence. So even if you have more than one occurrence um, of that query, it's going to just return the first one. Then we have get elements by class names, get element by tag name. Get elements by class name is going to get an element with a given, it's going to get elements with a given class name. So all elements with that class name are going to be returned in a list. And get element by tag name are going to get all elements with that tag name, and it's going to return them in a list. I've already explained query selector, and then query selector all is going to do the work of both uh, get element by class name and get element by tag name. It's going to do the work of the two of them. By if you want to get by class name, then you put dot, then the class name. And if you want to get them by tag name, you just put the tag name. And for query selector, if you want to, I've already explained the syntax for query selector. You put dot in front of the class name if you're querying for class, if you're querying for element with the class name, and if it is by yeah, and it's pick the first occurrence. And if it is going to be and if you're going to be selecting the element by its ID name, then you put hash in front of the ID name. And if it's going to be by tag name, you just put the tag name without any hash or dot.